I'm Rob Kellogg. Today we're going to talk about mold awareness. Now, there may be some environments that you get involved in construction that have had some damage to the building, and you are in there to do either demolition or you run across this during a renovation. So a lot of times when you have this mold exposure, this is due to a lot of situations that you normally wouldn't expect inside a building. A lot of damage comes from the weather and poor sealants, either from roofing, siding, things of that nature, or worst case scenarios, flooding. And when you go down into the areas that have had a lot of flooding opportunities, you're going to run into the mold a whole lot more, and we'll explain why here in a minute. So being aware that mold exists throughout our environment as naturally as human beings, we have a tendency to overlook the potential before we get involved with it. So when you're actually getting to start construction practices, some of the things you might want to look for is spotting, discoloration of materials, a certain odor is definitely could be in the air, that musty, dampish kind of smell or feel to the air. Those are good indicators that mold could exist, and that's something that we need to look for before we start disturbing it. Now, mold is a natural occurring element. It's a fungus. It's something that's everywhere, and you're going to have those spores actually start to shoot out of the base material when it gets activated with the right environment. Obviously, if it's too cold, you're not going to get any mushrooms, for example. Our mold kind of spores in a larger sense, but we're looking at something that's going to be something that's going to grow out of the materials or the environments you're going to work in inside buildings. So it is a fungus, and it's really hard to get rid of, and you're going to have professional removal practices in order for that to be done. We also want to understand, as we get involved with this, it is water activated. So if you're having rain coming in constantly into your work site, and the drywall is starting to go up and the bottom of it gets saturated, for long periods of time, mold can begin to grow. If storing it in very dark, damp environments could cause that initiation to occur as well. So we have to understand that if you've got paper products, you've got cardboard, you've got drywall paper, anything that's got kind of a paper base to it, if it gets wet, stays wet for long periods of time, it's kind of a trigger for mold to start the spore process. So we need to understand that when we get into the environment. Now, how do we protect ourselves? Because there's some health effects to this. If we get too much into our body, it can cause chronic sinus infections, chronic issues with breathing, respiratory issues, and in some extreme issues, it could be fatal. And we need to address that. Some of us may have heard of the black mold that we're dealing with that causes a lot of issues in people with very susceptible health issues that they already have. This just exasperates it, makes it worse. So knowing that these systems exist and where they might be found is a key factor into preventing ourselves from becoming exposed. The best way to prevent yourself from getting contaminated as far as orally or through your respiratory tract is make sure that you put that filtration system on, that dust mask. And those dust masks need to be rated at a P100. Now, as you see here, P100 masks, either on your face or if you wear a respirator, make sure that it is rated at a P100 level. Your N95s are not going to do you any good in this case. So make sure that you're doing it that way. Some of the effects that you might occur and give you indication that you're having problems with it is you have burning eyes, headache and nausea is another symptom, nosebleeds in extremes, and that's where your body's just reacting to that mold spore in there. Allergic reactions, and this could be stemming from the material itself, whereas one person could be exposed to a certain kind of mold spore and they don't react to it, but the one standing right next to them just breaks out in hives or whatever that might be. So we need to understand that we're individually sensitive to these environments. If you've got asthma, this will trigger it in a lot of ways. So you have to be mindful of that. If you have a sinus infection, it could accelerate that issue or initiate it, and we have to be mindful of that as well. So if you have any lung issues, pulmonary issues, you could cause some hemorrhaging. If that spore gets in there and starts to grow internally, that could be an extreme environment issue as well. And then finally, in worst case scenario, it could cause some issues such as cancer or even death. So we have to take mold seriously when we get into these environments and make sure that we're looking for these before we get involved with it. So some of the preventative measures you can take into play, like I said, wear those appropriate masks, repair those leaks and prevent the water from reoccurring. And then also look for those wet spots because of leak activity or environmental exposures, constant moisture from soil or a runoff. So we want to look at that as well. Preventing the condensation from developing. That's a big factor if you've got a room that's tight and you've got a lot of humidity in there, and you get an offset temperature, could cause some condensation to develop inside as well. So be very mindful of that. And then make sure you've got good circulation into the room that you're working in. Anything lower than 70% humidity is going to help alleviate that issue. You start going above 70%, now you got a mold spore potential environment, and we want to eliminate that. So if you have any questions in the future, looking at mold, potentially getting into demo operations, and like I said, after a flood or a weather condition or even an internal pipe burst operation for that demo could cause these issues to develop. And if it has been for several days afterwards and you're just now getting in there to perform those tasks, definitely be on the lookout for those symptoms and signs, those smells, those odors, those spotting potential indicators that you've got to have some mold removed. And if you've got to do it, make sure you protect yourself. Mold can get all over you in your clothing, so make sure if you are going to do any kind of mold removal activities, don't just protect your breathing zone. Make sure you protect the rest of your body too. And those clothes should be washed thoroughly after you get home and without mixing up with other stuff in your house. So you don't want to spread that inside your house as well. So just take good hygiene practices. Make sure you bag stuff up if you can't get rid of them on the field, but make sure that you bag stuff up before you take it in the house and keep that to a dull roar as far as exposure goes. So if you have any questions, as always, give us a call here at Ultimate Group. And as always, safety is not a mindset, it's a state of mind. Thanks for listening.